Alrighty, folks. Today we're going to be looking at my 1982 Ford LTD S. By the way, I'm John Cruz, and you're watching Cruise Control. So, um, first impression of the LTD S. It's basically just a box Panther platform, like a Crown Vic. Pretty much the same exact body as a Crown Vic. This is the last year of the LTD that's still in a Panther platform. In '83, they decided to go with a Fox body that is basically derived from the Fairmont sedan. They rounded off the front and the rear. They kind of gave it a slant back with big long taillights, and Ford, with some of their smaller cars, were very big into having yellow on the turn signals. So you'll find a lot of little yellow rectangles on a Fox body LTD. This one is an LTD S, and for 81 and 82, the S was you were only able to get it through fleet sales. And the S was the only Panther platform or Panther body that had the two headlight header panel instead of the four headlight. A lot of common misconceptions about these cars. Everybody who sees this says, "Oh, that's a '79 because it has the two headlights," and it's like, well, no. '79 was the first year that they used the smaller, downsized Panther platform, but it was also the first year that they used the two headlight design for the base LTDs. They never had an LTD S in '79. They just called all the two headlight cars with low options LTDs, and then the four headlight cars with high options were the LTD Landau. And the Landau, you'd have the four headlights, you'd have special chrome along the sides, you'd have on the C-pillar, instead of just having a badge that says LTD, there would actually be like a rectangle light, and it would say LTD Landau, and it would light up when the parking lights are on, like a coach lamp, you know? So, and in '79, also, since the base LTD was still one of the most popular cars ever sold in 1979, the base Chevy Impala, and you saw a lot of Dodge St. Regis, the Chrysler R bodies. Those were some of the most popular cars back in the day. Since every '79 had this front end, everybody associates it with the '79 because that's the most numbers surviving. In '80, they still held on to this front end, but they designated it only as the LTD S, which was through fleet sales, but also you could still go into a dealership and buy one off the rack. And basically you were buying a mooch special. You were buying what they used to call full-size economy. Basically the biggest, cheapest Ford you could buy, and almost no options. And it wasn't really a popular front end because it does kind of make the car look a little bit thinner in the front. And also, like I said about the Cadillac, most full-size luxury cars usually had four headlights. The more headlights and the more taillights there were, the fancier the car seemed to be. That's just how it went. Even though this thing does have Ford was famous for their pointy turn signals. You saw it in the '70s Fords and even in the '80s Mercurys and Lincolns. That was their thing, and it's weird how they incorporated that, but then they stuck it on such a basic front end. So in '82, they decided to give this particular body style and this header panel the axe. They just said, well, we're going to go with something different. And back in the late '70s, early '80s, my theory is that everybody was on coke at the time. Everybody from, the presidents and CEOs all the way down to the technicians. And when they were naming some of these cars, they just played it fast and loose with the nameplates. In '79, You had your LTD, which was this. You had your LTD Landau, which was the fancier version of this. They were the full-size car. Then you had your LTD 2, which was based on the old Torino bodies. And even though they were an intermediate, they were probably, I haven't looked at the specs, but I think they were a little bit bigger than the full-size car for that year. So for 79, Ford had that problem. And when Chevy or GM downsized their full-size cars in 77, they also had that problem. The 77 Impala, Caprice, Delta 88, 98, LeSabre, Electra, Catalina, so on and so forth, Bonneville. They were all full-size cars, but they were smaller. The B bodies are smaller than the A bodies. The mid-size, intermediate class cars like the Colonnade, Malibus, and Cutlass Supremes, and things of those natures. And this body style was in direct response to GM's downsizing of their full-size cars. But anyways, back to the nameplates. So you had your LTD, LTD2, LTD Landau. Then in 80, they dropped the Landau name. They dropped the LTD2 name. Then you had your LTD and your LTD Crown Victoria, which was the replacement for the Landau. And usually they would have a little badge right here, and they'd have the chrome halo bar that goes over the top, and usually a half vinyl top. Some of them, the high option ones, would come with a formal roof where they have like a fiberglass cap that would go on the back, and instead of having this window here, they would have a separate window that was mounted in there, and it was all covered by the fake, the vinyl top. So, and then they decided, like I said, to go turn the LTD into a Fox body car. And then they kept the LTD Crown Victoria for the full-size one. So even the cheapest, moochiest full-size Ford in 83 was still called a Crown Victoria. And then they designated the higher option ones as Crown Victoria LX, yada, yada, yada. Pontiac was notorious for this too, with their Bonneville, the Catalina, having the Bonneville being full-size for a couple years, and then having it being mid-size, having then the full-size be the Parisienne. Then the Bonneville in 88 was a front-wheel drive car. So yeah, they played it fast and loose with the nameplates as well. It was very confusing for buyers back then. Sometimes you just had to walk into a Pontiac dealer and say, give me the big one. Whatever you call the big one for this year. Just give it to me. But yeah. So, you'll notice the spotlight. This thing actually was never a police car. You can tell usually if it's a police package, it'll have any number of things. The spotlights were usually added on after the fact, maybe by the factory. Actually, I don't know. I'll have to look that up too. But I always thought that they were put in by the upfitters, the guys who put in the cages and the computers and the light bars and things like that. But you could tell if it's a police package car if it has an HD frame, where, from my understanding from the Demolition Derby guys, it'll be stamped down in the frame rail on the rear quarter. It'll say HD or STD. And the standard frame cars are usually the civilian cars, and the HD cars are usually the fleet cars, like cop cars, taxis, limousines, the usual stuff. So, 15-inch tires and wheels, from 79 through 85, these things came standard with 14-inch original wheels. For 14-inch by 6 for the 79 through 82s, and then 14 by 7 for the 83 to 85s. And you'd have optional 15-inch steel wheels, which were thin ones. They were for civilian market. You couldn't put the little poor boy hubcaps on them. You had 15-inch by 6.5 turbine aluminum wheels that were optional. And then the cop cars, not these wheels. These are from a Chrysler. So, for the purists out there, forgive me, but, this thing originally came with the little 14-inch wheels, and they were in laughably small, let's say, especially for a 3,800 pound, 17 footer, 18 footer, however long this thing is, this full size car. 14-inch wheels are small. You would get a 15 by 7 steel wheel with these are Mopar hubcaps. They're a little bit smaller than the standard GM and Ford hubcaps. I don't know the measurements. I think 9-inch. So these are like 7-inch, and then the Ford ones and the GM ones are 9-inch, and then the old 70s Fords and the 90s Fords had like an 11-inch hubcap that was only specific to that particular wheel. So you would have those, and it would have the standard plate hubcap, the shorty cap, and it would say Ford Motor Company on it. That, and then the last thing you could tell that it was a police package. Well, two things more. It would have a 140 mile an hour speedometer. This one only has an 85. It would have a 140 mile an hour speedometer, certified, calibrated, and instead of having a 1 here for first gear on the Prindle, it would have 2. So that means that when you raked it down into a lower gear to, downshift and get a little bit more oomph out of it, you wouldn't drop it all the way back into first and hand grenade the engine. And the last thing you could tell that it was a cop car. Now, this wasn't always the thing. It was still an option, but you would most likely have a 351 Windsor engine. And this one still has the original 302, even though it's had a lot of work done to it. And for the amount of work done to this thing, it should be faster than it is. It really... I gotta hook this thing back up. Whatever, I'll deal with it later. This thing is loud and kind of sounds like a muscle car from late 60s, early 70s. And it's quicker than the average 82. Like, it's quicker than it was stock, but it's still slow. Originally, these things would come with a 2-barrel variable Venturi carburetor. And I don't know the exact science behind it, but from my understanding, I actually had one of these things. I had an 81 Marquis. And instead of having a flap, like a steel flap, it would have 2 little plastic, ramps. And they would open and close with the throttle, and that would be the Venturi, and that would help with dispersing fuel and stuff. And they were just horribly complicated. They weren't nearly as bad as, the Cadillac 864 motors, the Chrysler lean burn, where it had the computer on the air cleaner, and those things always shit the bed all the time. Like I said, late 70s, early 80s, it was a trying time. I was alive for that. I was born in 80, but I was just, an infant at the time. But, you look back on history and how far we've come. It's really amazing to see the amount of desperation that they tried in order to meet strangling cafe regulations, government regulations, fuel economy regulations. 79, they went through their second gas crisis. Chrysler was on the brink of bankruptcy. It was a trying time. And most of these cars, after the warranty expired, they would put in a 2-barrel 2100 Autolite carburetor or Motorcraft or whatever the hell you call it. This thing has a new intake, headers. It's got a 4-barrel carburetor. I don't know what make it is. It still has the AOD transmission with all the TV cable and everything hooked up. It's got HEI ignition, meaning it's like the GM version of it where the coil, the computer, everything is all in one unit. And it's a lot simpler to use. You basically just have an on-off switch, and this is your vacuum advance. And as long as you have it timed properly, it's a good system. Previous owner cut out the air conditioning. You can see here this where the hoses used to be. And he also was kind enough to take out the washer bottle for whatever reason. So that's the end of that. And we're going to go to the trunk real fast. Let me get the keys. Yoink. So one of the few selling points about the Ford over the R body or the GMB body is things like this, like the trunk. So since the Pinto, the Ford has decided to use a deep trunk, and they would have the gas tank behind this bulkhead here facing upright. And the problem that the Pinto had, and some of the Crown Vics, a lot of these Crown Vics had this problem to a lesser degree, was that you get hit so hard in the rear end, and the trunk floor would push into the gas tank. The gas tank would push into the rear axle, and then the little perches where the springs are on the rear axle would puncture the gas tank and let the gas all over. Ford had a problem with this in the 90s and the 2000s, but it was because state troopers were on the side of the road and they were getting hit at like 70 miles an hour by a semi-truck, and then it would explode. And honestly, anything that gets hit by 70 miles an hour by a semi-truck is probably going to explode. I mean, the hell else is going to happen to it? So they put little plastic things on the ends of the caps so that they wouldn't puncture the gas tank. And Ford was supposed to do that back during the Pinto days, but they decided, it's just cheaper just to deal with the lawsuits rather than to put those on every single car, you know? These are not the original hubcaps that came with the car. These are 15s that I put on. Like, I had a set of steel 15-inch civilian Ford wheels on there. And I didn't really like the look of them. And also, one of the tires went flat, so I had, like, another mismatched wheel on there. The original hubcaps were similar to these, but they were the 14-inch ones. They're back at home. I got rid of all the tires and wheels. I still have the hubcaps. I like to hang them on the wall. So this is a really deep trunk. And maybe, hell, I don't know, 4 sets of clubs. Maybe a couple, 2 or 3 bodies, you know. Maybe 4 or 5 if you cut them up and you package them right. It's a pretty expansive trunk. The GM would have... You wouldn't have all this here. Like, the spare tire would still be there, but this floor would be flat, and the gas tank would be right underneath, and then the filler neck would come out where the license plate was. And in my opinion, like, that's a hell of a lot closer to whatever's going to rear end you, and more likely to have a spillage, but whatever. And you really don't gain anything by having all this room back there on the GM, because you still have the spare tire taking up everything. Here, this room is just for small little things. Oh, and there's a washer bottle. Thanks, guy. You know, and he also gave me some washer fluid too. You know, and that wasn't the previous owner. That was the owner before. The previous owner was a demolition derby guy, and he pretty much bought the car almost the way it is now, except it still had the original 14s on it. And he had this air cleaner on instead. I swapped out one with the actual snorkel on it. So that's the trunk. And I always like to do this. I like to sit in the back seat of these things before we take them out for a spin, just so you can see, you know, how much room is back there. And like I said in the other video, I'm 6'3", 200 and so-and-so pounds, 270-ish. And we'll see how I, you know, if I'm a bear in a clown car in this thing. So, I mean, it has room. It's still a full-size car. This seat is all the way back. These seats do not recline because it's the base model car. If it was just a regular LTD base model, then yes, maybe they would have an optional or a standard driver recliner. No, the passenger recliner would be a standard. But, you know, I have enough leg room, so to speak. There's barely enough hat room, about a hand's worth. Since it's the base model, stock crank windows, no power locks, no frills, no thrills. It's pretty basic. You know, vinyl seats, easy to clean. Surprisingly enough, the headliner is still stuck up on this. All this glue and stuff kind of worries me. I wonder what it was like before. Maybe it was redone. But there's enough room back here. There's enough for 6 people. And what other car can haul 6 people, 4 sets of clubs, and tow a boat all at the same time? Maybe the Impala. The Chrysler could probably, or the Dodge version, the Dodge St. Regis would be the direct competitor to this. The Dodge St. Regis, yes, can hold 6 people. Um, Technically, yes, it can tow a boat. You won't have as much towing capacity because the Chrysler versions of these things were subframe cars. They weren't a full frame like this one is, and they would have torsion bars and leaf springs to make up for it. They handled a lot better, but the ride quality wasn't as good. These cars were marketed as smoother, or I'm sorry, quieter than a Rolls Royce. I've never driven a Rolls Royce before, but these things are probably one of the quietest riding cars I've ever driven or ridden in. Is the 79 through 1991 Panther platform box cars. So yes, that's the back seat. I promised I would keep this around half an hour, so hopefully I'm not running long. I'm at 21 minutes now, so we're gonna head on back. Oh, another thing too, you can tell it's an 82 by the automatic overdrive badges on the fenders. So in 81 they would have this badge, but they would have it on the trunk. In 83 through 84 they would have a badge in this location, but it would say electronic fuel injection if it was equipped with it, because 83 was the first year they went with it looks like a carburetor, but it's a throttle body injection system, and it has 2 injectors and a circular air cleaner, and everybody says, oh, it's a carburetor. I was like, well, technically no. The 82s would have a blue oval here, and they would have a blue oval on the trunk. This guy the previous owner put in this chrome one. 82 was the first year that Ford tried going back to the blue oval design from, I don't know, the 20s or whatever it is. But from 79 through 81, and even before then, they would just have FORD all over the place, on the trunk, on the grill, and so on. We're going to jump inside. That mirror there, this car did not come with a passenger side mirror, and that one is actually a power mirror out of a 88, I think. You could tell the little gray surround around the mirror itself, and the standard remote manual ones do not have that. They're just a cast aluminum. The previous owner before the previous owner, the second one, he put in some aftermarket gauges. He had the tack over here, and I always rammed into it with my hand shifting it, so I moved it up over here. But since the air conditioning is probably never going to work again, I think I'm thinking about putting it here. The spotlight, well, it used to work. Now it does not. But also there's a problem in the gearing where if you want it to sit upright, it doesn't. It just kind of like, it's not supposed to twist like that. It's supposed to come up, and then you move this to move the spotlight around. So we're going to put that back. But it's nice to have there, you know. Maybe one day I'll find another one of these and hook it all up. Like I said, 85 mile an hour speedometer. It has a quartz clock. That's one of the only options this car has besides factory air conditioning, which does not work anymore. This aftermarket radio was put in by the second previous owner, I think. And originally it would have the old-fashioned AM or AM/FM radio with the 2 knobs, because you can see here this little chrome area is where the face and the buttons would be. Also, since it's an S, it doesn't have all wood like the Crown Victoria does. The only wood you'll see is, actually, that's not wood. That's just black. This is fake black. And it's a body-colored or interior-colored panel. And it actually says LTD S on the dash over here. In 83, when they went to the 4 headlight cars, they still had a surplus of LTD S dashboards. So there is at least one other car I know that's an 83 that still has LTD S on it. It's at a junkyard up in Watertown, Wisconsin. It's a white 83. Technically, it's a LTD Crown Victoria wagon, but I mean, it's the moochiest wagon you've ever seen. There's absolutely nothing on it. There's no air conditioning, I don't think, in that car. So, no cup holders, which was the style of the time, and one of the previous owners put in this thing. So at least now there's something. But we're gonna go ahead and fire this thing up and get this show on the road because I'm running out of time. Another nice thing about this car is it has 2 keys, which was also the style of the time. So since I drove it 12 miles up here, when this car gets warm and you shut it down and then you try to start it back up again, it kind of doesn't want to turn over. I think it's some kind of vapor lock issue or something. I'm not quite sure. But we are going to plug this thing in here. And let's see if there's a way we can switch it around so I can see myself. Whatever, we'll just do it this way. So hopefully you guys can hear me. Let me roll up the window and buckle up. One of the other big selling points about the Panther platform cars in '79 was that they call it command seating. And what it means is that you are sitting up higher in the car than you would be with a General Motors or a Chrysler car. Back in the 70s and up into the early 80s, it was pretty common to have, like, the popular style was long, low, and wide. That's how it was. And a lot of these cars, you felt like you were sunk inside the car. Like, the windowsills were very high, the dashboard was very high, the seat was very low. And Ford kind of corrected this by making you sit up a little bit higher so that you have more of a view of the road in front of you. And they called it command seating, and I actually kind of like it. To this day, it's one of the highlights of owning a Panther car over a GM body or a Chrysler R body. And when I say here, for the folks that don't know what I'm talking about, a Panther platform car is any Ford product, any Ford or Mercury full-size car from 1979 through 2011, and any full-size Lincoln car from, 1980 through 2011. So we're talking the Lincoln Town Car, the Ford Crown Victoria, Mercury Grand Marquis, the Mercury Marauder, the Lincoln Mark VI, and that's the American market. There's other cars that are built, like there's a Venezuelan Ford Conquistador, which is also a Panther platform car. There's a company called Zimmer that makes a neoclassic. Basically, they take a Grand Marquis and they put on like a front end from like a 1930s Excalibur or something like that, and that's also a Panther car. So that's what I'm talking about when I say Panther platform. And a Fox body is like Mustangs, Mercury Capri, Ford Thunderbird, the 83 through 86 LTD and Marquis, the Fairmont, the Zephyr, the 80 and 81 Mercury Cougar. Actually, Mercury Cougar is from 80 on up. The Ford Granada from 80 to 81 or 82, American market only, not the British market. So that's what I'm talking about with the Fox body. Anyways, back to the car I'm driving right now. Like I said, for the amount of work that's been put in this engine, it should be a lot faster than it is. I mean, it's quick, but it's not like muscle car fast. It sounds loud and it's a little bit peppier, but it's not as much as it should be. And maybe it's the timing, maybe it's the the overdrive transmission that's holding it back. Who knows? Maybe it's the gearing and the reaxle. I don't know. But the car does run smooth, and for the amount of noise from the exhaust and the wind noise, because it is, a 40-year-old car almost, a lot of the weather stripping's going bad, so you get a little bit of wind noise and stuff, especially with the windows up. But compared to some other 40-year-old cars I've driven, this thing is fairly quiet. I mean, Ford really built these cars well, and I can't even imagine what it would sound and feel like brand new. I've driven a couple mid-'80s Panther platform Fords. My first was an '85 Crown Victoria, and that thing was back in 1998. So at the time, it was only like 13 years old. It only had 33,000 original miles on it, and that car also rode like a bank vault. It rode quiet. It was well built. Even though some of the trim was misaligned on it, that chrome halo bar I was talking about, well, that was off by probably about a half an inch on one side, and that was just the quality control back then. Nobody really cared if the trim didn't line up. Chryslers were famous for having notorious build problems, build quality issues. So I don't know. I mean, as far as like if I were 41-year-old dad looking for a full-size car back in 1982, I wouldn't be able to buy this thing because I would not have any affiliations with any kind of fleet or anything. But if I had to choose between an 82 Ford LTD, an 82 Chevy Impala, or I don't even know if they made R-body Chryslers for 82. It would either be an 82 Plymouth Fury or a Dodge Diplomat or something like that. Or I don't know if they made the St. Regis through 82. But either way, I would still probably have to choose the Ford.